And so, which is going to take me to cover crops, which is the next thing to talk about here. It's actually a very important one. Most of us don't use as much space in the winter garden as we do in the summer because we don't have any squash to spread everywhere. We don't have melons. We don't have intensive crops like corn that take up all this space, you know. Even tomatoes that kind of use a lot of space up. Things like onions and cabbages and lettuce and so on, and the peas go up trellises and so on. They're pretty conservative in their land use. So you will probably have some land that you're not going to be using the crop on, or even bite the bullet and make some, because my suggestion to all gardeners is you will burn your yard out. You will burn your garden out if you forever said, this plot is my vegetable garden. Everything else is my rose garden, my ornament, the dog run, and whatever, and you never leave that spot. If you do that, you're going to be hard-pressed to be able to maintain nutrients, soil structure, and to keep diseases out if you take that approach. You're much, much better off if you can manage to say, this is my garden, and also this is my garden. But this part of the garden rests periodically, and this part grows, and move back and forth between them. And there are a lot of cover crops that will rest the ground that even look like you have a garden going. I mean, I've used wildflower seeds as cover crops before and found they actually had enough nutrient value when they're worked back into the soil after a couple years to grow peppers and tomatoes just without fertilizer from the value of the wildflower stems. They're vital plants. But other cover crops, the winter time is a good time to cover some of the land up in a crop that's going to nurse the soil. It's going to be there for only one reason, just to bring the life back to the earth. I don't care how much chicken manure you haul, how much fertilizer you buy, and how much compost you make. Nothing will enrich the ground like a plant does. The body of a dead plant is really where soil comes from. That is the value in soil. The rest is mineral, and then there's microbes and fungi that are involved in the life, but it's the plants that make the whole thing come together so that you have soil that falls apart in your hand instead of something you would make a brick out of. Okay, and so having cover crops, right now we should be planting winter rye. Cereal rye is one of my favorites. That's this stuff here. The mature rye plant has a half mile of fine root hairs on each plant. So take a thought about that. They're nice, fine little threads that weave through the soil a half mile's worth on each little rye plant. You try to shovel that much manure, and you get it just simply by putting down the seeds. If you have big areas like this garden, you can just broadcast the seeds and then take your tiller, set it on the highest setting where you're only kicking the soil a little, and drive it over the top of the seeds. It'll bury the seeds effectively without damaging them, so you can plant huge areas in the fall using the tiller over the top of the seeds. It's really fun. For years I've been doing this. I got an old paperboy bag. I fill it up full of seeds, and I walk around. And I go like this, and I throw perfect arcs, and I can see them glisten in the sun as they lay out one next to the other. And I'm like 5,000 years ago somewhere, you know, in Genesis, planting my fields. You know, it's such an ancestral thing. I love it. And being able to do it properly is a sense of pride. You will like it. Connects you to the earth and to the past. But take it and mix the seed if you're not so good with sand or compost. Planting mix is a good thing, especially if you got fine, really fine seeds, like if you're doing alfalfa or something, or clover seed, which is very tiny. Mix it up with a bunch of compost. Put it in layers in a bucket with seed compost, seed compost, seed compost, kind of tumble it, and then toss the compost. You can see the compost, so you know where it went, and the compost will spread the seeds out so you don't get clots, you know. The winter rye is a cereal grain, and it can be cut several times during the course of the winter like grass, and you can just lay it as a mulch. And that's what I do. I just cut it as it's growing and let it fall down. I seldom let it actually seed. Come spring, it gets too hot and dry for it, the stuff just dies anyway, right there in the soil. So you don't have to till it. If you want to till it in spring, you can, and that'll definitely kill it off, which is fine. But you don't have to take it away. You can just cut it and leave the straw lay like you're using a straw mulch and plant through it. Put the tomatoes right in through the rye stems. Fava bean is another one that's very popular here. A lot of people like to eat it. For the rest of us, like myself, who will only eat it when somebody else knows how to prepare it, and otherwise it's green manure in my garden, it can be cut repeatedly and it can be mixed with the rye. You can put the two out together. And it's possible to even take, you got a row of cabbages here, but you got a walk row over here. You can throw the stuff in the walk row and trample it later too. You can integrate this in what you're doing, or you could just take part of the garden, put it to cover crop, and the other part to vegetables, and then try to remember the next year to flip that, so that you're kind of going back and forth a little bit. Hairy vetch is another one that's really good as a cover crop. Fava bean and hairy vetch are both legume, the bean and pea family. They will fix nitrogen if they've been inoculated with rhizobia. Am I going beyond anybody on what that means? The legumes like beans, peas, and so on, anything in that group has a bacteria that lives on its roots, and they're usually some form or another of rhizobia, and they make little nodules on the roots of a fava bean, or little nodules on clover. Those little nodules are full of a rhizobia bacteria that every time there's a weather change and free nitrogen radicals settle down to the earth, especially if we get some thunder and lightning, which is rare here, but if we get it, we get like nitrous oxide, laughing gas, which is why you get giddy in thunderstorms if there's a lot of it. Okay. As a kid, I used to love this. I never figured out I was getting high. I thought it was the weather. But the stuff settles down to the earth because it's heavier in the atmosphere, and it especially comes down with the rainwater and bubbles in the rain too. And it'll settle on the earth. The rhizobias grab the stuff, and then they store it in the nodules of the roots. When you kill the plant that the rhizobia were on, all the nitrogen comes back out for your corn, tomatoes, or whatever. And the vegetation, as you're cutting it and laying it as compost or in mulch, also contains nitrogen that was stored from the air by these little bacteria guys. If you're using some of the really good organic fertilizers, say like Dr. Earth has Rhizobia japonica in the bag, okay? Or if you've been inoculating your peas and beans with the pea and bean inoculant over the years, then you probably have enough rhizobia in your earth already to take care of this. But if you haven't been paying attention to inoculating legumes in your garden, then do so. Get a bag of inoculant and dip your seeds in it. I just did favas for a lady. We took a big Ziploc full of favas, threw the inoculant in there, shook it up, and then went and planted them all. But it's a legume inoculant, and depending on what legume you're planting, if you're going to really get extreme, alfalfa has one that's different than clover. There's little strains, but the general garden legumes like peas, beans, fava beans, soybeans, all use the same one, Rhizobia japonica. Yeah, so the process would be that as these things grow across the winter, since we do have a growing season here in the winter, I recommend that you mow them periodically, whether you do it with a hand sickle or a weed whacker or your power mower, and just grind them back to some extent. If you leave about 4 inches of stub when you do that, they're going to regrow again.
What crop was that?
Well, any of these cover crops. I had mentioned hairy vetch, winter rye. You can use winter wheat. Wheat isn't as good as rye, but it's fine. Fava beans, again, there's the Austrian winter pea is another one that people like to use. Oats also works, by the way, too, as a cereal grain. I recommend you mix the cereal grains with a legume of some kind. So a vetch, a pea, or a fava bean mixed with rye, wheat, or oats out there as a cover crop is the best one. And you can take these and you can cut them back repeatedly over the winter to keep things under control. You can walk right on them, so you can literally do these in your walk rows if you want to, growing your winter crops in the opposite row, and then come spring, turn around the process, put a summertime cover crop over what was your winter crop rows if you want to do it that way. It's many different ways to do it. But come spring, either just cut everything down to the ground. The heat of summer will usually kill these plants off if you mow them low enough in spring, and then you can plant directly into them. You don't have to remove them. You can use the straw as a mulch to keep the weeds down and the moisture in spring, or you can take your tiller and go out and just grind it all into the ground, add some more compost fertilizer, and start planting. Okay?
Is buckwheat considered a cover crop?
Buckwheat is a great cover crop. It's real good at fixing phosphorus, of all things, which is odd. Okay, Most don't, but buckwheat is a summer crop,
Okay.
summertime crop. Good for drawing bees too.
Maybe around June.
If you're going to use a cover crop in the summer, which I wasn't going to cover that now, but you would want to use alfalfa or Dutch white clover or buckwheat. Okay, all real good summer crops. I love alfalfa. That's my favorite, but buckwheat is a good one. Alfalfa is a permanent, and I usually keep it, period. My orchard is filled with alfalfa. Alfalfa makes tap roots sometimes over 6 feet deep in the soil here. And I've actually had the experience of growing 4 years of alfalfa in a plot and then killed it with a tiller, went over the top and just sowed grass seed, fescue lawn grass over it, covered the seed with some compost, and it's been there now for 8 years and I've never fertilized the ground and the grass grows like crazy. Yet, because of the residual nitrogen, because I recycle the grass clippings and so on, the alfalfa fixed so much nitrogen in that area when I put the grass down that I was almost afraid to feed because I didn't want to bother with having to mow that often. Alfalfa's a real good summer one. Buckwheat's a good one. Buckwheat's a fast one. Buckwheat's 60, 90 days, all over with. Back to buckwheat again. Alfalfa, again, on the other hand, can persist 15, 20 years even. So if you have orchards, citrus, things like that where it's sunny, use that one.
She had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I have very small, raised beds, very small. So when I'm doing cover crops, I usually cut them and put them in my compost.
This is good.
Is that, it's going back into the
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
it's good.
Okay, good.
It's good. I'm such an advocate of never letting the soil be bare. The reason behind all that would be that this climate, a Mediterranean climate, is really quite destructive to soil. It doesn't sequester carbon well here. If you go parts of Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, up to Minnesota, Saskatchewan, you get into the great prairie areas where carbon sequestered marvelously. The soil temperatures were generally fairly cool. The rainfall was not too high. And so the plant debris, as it accumulated in the soil, stayed as carbon, and you get these deep black soils that maybe some of you have seen that are marvelous, incredible, some of the best farm soils on earth. California's Mediterranean climate has a tendency to take the plant material, and during the summertime it will oxidize it to ash and mineral because of the sun. Okay? And in the wintertime it then washes it away. And so we end up turning all our organic matter instead into carbon. We turn it into salts and minerals or ash during summer drought, and then flush it out of the soil as a mobile salt, basically, during the wintertime and the rains. And so if you're accumulating materials on top of your ground, it will prevent the sun from baking the soil and creating the oxidation. It will also allow your beneficial microbes and macrobes, like worms, to work closer to the top of the earth, which is where you really want them. Okay? Otherwise, they have to dig deeper into the soil to get away from all that sunlight, which they don't like. And in the wintertime, the mulch will help the rain move across the soil in a more dispersed pattern, so it doesn't tend to leach as bad, and things will soak into the little piece of plant straw, your minerals and so on will kind of hang on them and crystallize in a piece of straw instead of heading to the bank.